I actually ran into a guy, an older gentleman, yesterday at a Walmart. Moved here from Louisiana maybe about a year ago, and I walked by him and I acknowledged him, right? I said hello. He said hello back, and I started walking away, right? Then he stopped me. He's like, "Excuse me, sir. You're the first young black person in this town to say hello to me.
Say the town.
What
Say that a
is
little
up
bit
with
louder for the
that?"
people in the back. What town? And say it again.
At Tucson, Arizona. I'm calling us out. What is up? Interesting conversation, right? And one of the things that he was telling me, how black people lost our sense of community. The people that grew up in the 50s and the 60s, that they are the ones that are responsible for us losing that sense of community within the black community. So I was just wondering, just kind of based on any kind of conversations you can recall from people you have been around, can you see where that disconnect has come from? And in your own personal life, where do you?
Tony and I are the children of the civil rights movement. He's the older generation, older tier of the children of the people that were in the civil rights movement. He was old enough to be, I think Tony's old enough to be a teenager, or at least 10 years, 9 years old in the midst of a lot of that stuff. So I think that the statement is slightly skewed because we're forgetting about the input of the CIA and the government to be invasive in our lives, in our education, in our organizations, and insidiously break us up from the inside. So yeah, we may have, I guess that generation may have been responsible for being attacked and not knowing it. So I wouldn't put it on that generation. I would put it on the government and the powers that be that got inside the Black Panther Party, that ensured that men were framed for killing Malcolm X. That generation made sure that we refer to Dr. King as Martin Luther King instead of Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King. He has been changed, transformed through the generations to a mere man. So again, I said this a couple of episodes ago. If we don't see the people playing Chinese checkers while we're playing checkers, then we're going to keep on seeming like we're the ones that's doing it.
That's a good point, man. Now, what you said, Bennett, it brought me back to something, because yeah, I said the same thing to my folks when we were coming up. I asked questions because I was inquisitive about everything, about my color, about my heritage, about even my mom being, Cherokee, about my grandma. I was inquisitive about everything, about religion, about why things were the way they were, and I'm going to take you guys back a step further. Not too long ago, we talked about what happened, where were you at, what was going on when Roots was going on, you know what I mean? A lot of stuff was directed, like you said, it was directed by someone other than us to cause that division, to cause that us not to trust each other. You know what I'm saying? It wasn't us automatically not trusting each other. Stuff was put in place, like Mr. Bennett said. Yeah, it was put in place for us to do that. And I'm glad you brought that up, BJ, because again, I whenever I see people, I'm the same way. I'm like Mr. Benz. I'm like you. I recognize, and like I said, sometimes I'll stop the chat. We can strike up a conversation, and I'm okay with that. But if they, if they don't decide to keep a conversation, I'm still good with that. But it's not. I think sometimes we're our own worst enemy at times. We can be our own worst enemy at times. I fought some of the leaders. You know what I'm saying? And you guys think about what I'm saying. I'm not all leaders, but I'm faulting some of these guys that were walking with Dr. King. You know what I mean? These guys that were walking, they didn't take the mantle. They didn't do anything with it after he.
They didn't want to get shot.
You know what I'm saying? They didn't want to be that, like you said, exactly. Thank you. They didn't want to be that.
They didn't want to be the next martyr.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So the reason why I believe we don't have any targeted Black leaders right now is because the young generation got smart and they realized you can't assassinate, somebody who you don't know the president is. So what I appreciate about this generation, every generation has its flaws, but this generation, our generation want them to have a designated leader, but that's because we're used to that. But look at all our designated leaders. Did you see Judas and the Black Messiah? that. So people got strategically backed into a corner to betray us because, either they would have to cop a plea or they'd have to go to jail and sacrifice and get nothing for either one. So there's a lot of engineering to get us to backfire on each other.
It's kind of like Jesus and the disciples. Kind of like Jesus and the disciples. How the disciples are ridiculed for following Jesus. So I mean, not to that extreme, but I always look at that when we talk about it. I'm glad you brought that up too about that leadership, man. That leadership is huge, and I'm not a follower of. Again, cover my history, knowing Jesse Jackson, knowing Sharpton, knowing these guys' track record. Me and DJ, we've had these conversations about, who knows where they're going to come from, but I'm not going to hold my breath. You know what I'm saying? I'm not going to hold my breath because there's so much stuff out there now, and we're so divided amongst ourselves now. You know what I mean?
But we're realizing that the division can now become our strength.
Yeah, I kind of agree with Tony Bonner. Like, sometimes we're our own worst enemy. Like, for me, coming up in the South, like, certain things I expect out of white people. I expect. So when certain things happen, it's kind of like no big deal to me. But the worst things that I've seen, the worst things that have happened to me, and some of the worst things I've seen, from people getting robbed to people getting murdered, have been from people who look just like me. When I go home and I walk around, my head is on swivel. And it's not on swivel because I'm worrying about some white dude running up on me. It's because of somebody who looked just like me. And I think, and I get it, there are, the system has put in place obstacles to keep us divided, whether it's flooding our communities with drugs or mass incarceration or whatever the case may be. But at some point, we're going to have to stand up and take accountability for ourselves and say, no, I will not serve this poison to my brothers and sisters. I will not kill my brothers and sisters. So, we just got to do better, man, overall. And, yes, the system is in place, but we know it's in place. So what are we going to do about it? And we haven't done anything about it. And as far as those leaders, like Jesse Jackson, Al Sharpton, they can miss me with them two.
Thank you.
I don't trust either one of them. And, I don't know, I wasn't living back then, so I don't know if they tried to take up the mantle. They weren't the right people to take up the mantle anyway. So I don't know who's going to rise to the top, but we're going to have somebody to pull us together because things are getting worse by the day. That's just my.
I will defend those leaders just slightly because every man is flawed. You do see a documentary on any great person, you'll see their flaws. And, honestly, Al Sharpton, the first time some of us heard of him was when he was in James Brown's entourage. Al Sharpton, that's where he was a reverend, but he was part of James Brown entourage. And James Brown was his mentor. Right?
Well, it's not because they're flawed, man, because just like you said, Martin Luther King was flawed. We know some of the things that he did. He wasn't a perfect man. And
right.
He was pretty young when he got killed. So, he didn't have a chance to make some of the things he did right. But anyway, as far as Al Sharpton, and I just don't trust their character. I just don't. It's just some about them that I just can't rock with.
Hey,
seems
you know what?
Disingenuous. I know it seems disingenuous.
And you're right though, because see, Mr. Bennett, he can relate because we grew up, in Memphis and Tennessee. We know the history of these guys. You know what I'm saying? We know the type of politics that these guys play. And it's even more prevalent now. I hate to say you're showing your true colors, but they're showing their true colors as far as to what they're representing. You know what I'm saying? They're not carrying that moniker. And that's just my own personal thing. They haven't ever shown me that they could carry this moniker, without them being true, not showing their flaws. A lot of things opened my eyes. You guys remember the case, the Duke case, right? You remember the Duke case with the girl claiming to be raped by these Duke boys? And
yeah.
And they kicked up all that dust. And I'm just saying, they kicked up all that dust. They never came back, man. And, and said, hey, we were wrong. And to me, it's okay to be wrong. But I think they lost everything with that. the way they handled that, man, and the way they just left that, I was like, yo, this is pretty much in character. And that's what I was telling my kids back then. This is the character of leadership that we have to kind of steer away from. You know, we quick to jump the gun without, you know what I'm saying, without having all the facts. Yeah, you know what I'm saying? But then when we get the facts, we're not man enough or strong enough to come back and say, hey, we was wrong. You know what I'm saying? I think they would have gotten more credibility for coming back saying, hey, we were wrong. You know, this is what was presented to us. And now that we have this, we were wrong. But they never came back and did that, man. And like I said, go ahead. I'm sorry.
They both have credibility in the streets, because I know that both the Rainbow Coalition and Reverend Al's organization are doing major things in New York under the radar. But when it comes to the worldwide stage, they both just look shady. I mean, you heard the mic on Reverend Jackson when he was talking about President Obama, right? He was throwing shade at him because he was supposed to be the first Black president in his mind. So he was throwing shade, and that was his personality. But there's some things that's not being broadcast that they're still doing in the hood that is really making a difference in people's lives. And I'm not an advocate for either one of them, as in I'm a part of their organizations, but I can acknowledge the good and the not so good about what I've seen in the public. But, you know, again, you got to be able to have a comprehensive perspective, and as opposed to just seeing what's put on CNN and Fox News, because those are privately owned news organizations, and they're gonna paint whatever story they want to paint. So yeah, both those individuals, they don't have great images in the public eye.